Hello, in this video, I am talking to the author of this amazing book, as you probably could tell from the thumbnail, Keith Ammann. Hello, Keith.
Hi, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for giving me your time. This will be a little bit of time where I just praise you, basically. I'm going to jump straight in. How did you think this would affect DMs and the community?
Well, I had some foreknowledge of that because the blog that I write of the same name, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, preceded the book, and actually led to the creation of the book. I'd been writing it for a couple of years, and I already knew from feedback that I got directly, that I saw on Reddit, things like that. I knew that people had begun using my blog as a sort of reference source, which I hadn't intended it to be in the first place. But once I saw that it was heading that way, I leaned into it. And I also knew that it was tending to make life more difficult for players, which is why even before The Monsters Know came out as a book, I wrote a self-published ebook called Live to Tell the Tale: Combat Tactics for Player Characters. And when I was contacted by an editor and offered the book deal for The Monsters Know What They're Doing, I asked to make Live to Tell the Tale part of that same book deal, and so that's how they both got published as books by that same publisher, Saga Press.
Well, if you'll indulge me for a moment, this
Mhm.
is via Facebook. When I said I was interviewing you, and if anybody owned the book, okay. So it says his advice is some of the best I've ever got. Really helps differentiate some monsters that seem similar. An excellent resource and exercise in thinking about your monsters as real creatures with instincts and motivations. I love this book. It's great fun and interesting, as well as my most quoted line to my players, as in the monsters know what they're doing. It also happens to be the first third-party style book I bought after the DMG and before finishing my collection of source books. Another guy says, great books. It really lifted my DM game reading his comments on the website, but I much prefer the book. I often reference it when running a new creature I haven't used before. Great book.
Give
Had
me
it.
all those people's addresses. I'll hit them up for blurbs in the future.
Yeah. Had an intellect devourer hit a player that rolled incredibly poorly on his save, then watched that player sweat as the rest of the player couldn't figure out what to do, as the intellect devourer ran and hid in shadows, waiting for the rest of the party to flee the area. Prior to his book, I never understood how such a low-C threat could be so dangerous. It's an exposed brain with legs. How hard can it be to kill the rest of the party that isn't stunned? I mean, people just go on and on. The info that Ammann provides is very useful, and I enjoy the writing style as well. Comment after comment of praise, Keith. Pretty cool, right?
I try not to let it go to my head. No, I mean, I'm glad to be helpful. It all emerged originally out of my own dissatisfaction with my own performance when I got back into D&D after many, many years away from it and was playing The Lost Mine of Phandelver with my group and had those, first couple of encounters with, am I giving a spoiler here? Goblins. And but in those experiences, feeling like I myself had not really managed to capture as a DM the nature of those goblins. They were just kind of an undifferentiated threat in a cave, and I wasn't satisfied with that. And I was thinking to myself, what am I missing here? That these goblins just feel like mooks, that they could be anything. They could be anything in this cave. You're supposed to feel like they're goblins. What is there about goblins that I'm missing? And that's when I started really doing the close reads of the stat blocks and looking for clues that would tell me, what is it that makes a goblin a goblin? What is it that makes encountering goblins distinctive? And it was about that same time that I had decided I wanted to get back into a more regular, everyday writing process, and thought that a blog would be a good vehicle for doing that. And I don't remember exactly what made me put those two things together, but I did, and yeah, it took on a life of its own.
So before that, were you a writer in some respect?
Yes, I have a pretty extensive background as a language professional. I've been a journalist, I've been a copy editor,
Hmm.
done I've done reviews, I've done opinion pieces, I taught writing for a while. I have a very, very long history in that writing space, and so that I think is a big advantage that I have as a producer of this kind of content. That I'm intimately familiar with the writing process. I've done it professionally. I can largely edit myself. Although if you're going for publication, you always want at least two pairs of eyes on everything.
Hmm.
But but I flatter myself to think that my copy is probably a little bit cleaner when it goes into the mill than other people's. And so yeah, and I've had a lot of time to hone my own voice. You know, I know how to use the tools in the kit.
Yeah, for most people, it would be a good idea that they had while reading the Monster Manual or prepping or whatever. And I think that as soon as you started to seriously look at the undertaking of even converting a solely the Monster Manual as you have, it'd be like, oh, it's just too much. It's an insurmountable hill. But you just thought, no. Obviously, your journalistic tactics or methods or something was like, no.
But I didn't set out to conquer the whole hill at once.
Okay.
I was just trying to, you know, get myself back into a daily writing practice. That's the
Mm,
word I was looking for before, not process. Daily practice. And you know, this was just the vehicle for that. And I didn't have a, you know, a date by which I intended to complete the entire monster manual. I didn't even necessarily plan to do the entire monster manual. I was just, you know, here's today's monster, and tomorrow I'll do tomorrow's monster, and the day after that
yeah.
I'll do another one, and just keep going forward in that kind of, you know, rambly fashion,
Mm,
discovering my format along the way. And yeah, and it wasn't until I was offered a book deal that I started thinking about it as, well, okay, now I've got a certain amount of time to complete, you know, as much of the book as I can, and you know, then move on to the next thing. I think by the time I was offered the book, I had already moved on to Volo's Guide to Monsters at that point. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think that's the case. And so it was more a matter of taking what I'd written already and polishing it up, finding mistakes that I had made, and fixing them, and you know, putting together a little additional material to make sure that the book was something more than just the blog. You know, that it had
mm,
additional material in it. That was one of the requirements. It had to have at least 10% new original materials. So, analyzing a few monsters that I'd skipped over, adding
yeah.
some sidebar content, things like that to get it into that final shape.
What about when you've done goblins and then later you're doing kobolds,
Mhm.
and are you thinking, hang on, I'm writing exactly the same thing here? You know, how did you keep things different?
Except I wasn't, because it turned out that kobolds, by the virtue of their stat block, were actually significantly different from goblins. I mean, goblins, everything with goblins revolves around that nimble escape feature. It enhances their action economy. It highlights their character as these shifty little hit and run critters. It it gives them an edge. When you have kobolds, now you're looking at something whose only edge is this sort of innate ability they have to coordinate, and also their size. You know,
Mm,
the fact that they dig these burrows and can give themselves an advantage over larger creatures by making their burrows too small for those larger creatures to navigate, you know, making them too tight, and making it pitch dark. You know, kobolds have the sunlight sensitivity, which means not only are they not diurnal creatures, they don't really like to go above ground at all. They are most at home underground. And so the fact that they live in these underground tunnels is going to mean that why would they bother putting up any light sources at all? Everyone else is who's not them is going to be stumbling around trying to find their way through the kobold layer, and the kobolds are going to take advantage of their familiarity with that terrain, their numbers, and the fact that people underestimate them. The old Tucker's kobolds anecdote, which people keep reminding me of every 6 to 8 months as if I've never heard of it, but
The thing with kobolds, you mentioned the sunlight sensitivity. In the Dragon of Icespire Stormwreck Isle, the new starter set,
Mhm.
that uses kobolds quite a lot, and I don't think it even trucks with the sunlight sensitivity. It's almost like they don't have it, So yeah, which is fine. But I didn't even know until you
WotC
said
published
they had
books
that.
have no obligation to conform to anything I write, so
Yeah. But also kobolds are really big on traps, aren't they? That seems to
That's not
be a thing.
necessarily in their stat block.
Yeah.
That I believe is something that comes out of their flavor text, and probably that went into the flavor text inspired by Tucker's kobolds. I mean, if you have these smaller creatures that are not genius level intellects, but they are practical, they are good at coordinating and cooperating with each other. They are exploiting their familiarity with their terrain over their opponent's unfamiliarity with it. Traps are natural. It's a natural way that they would give themselves just that little bit of extra edge.
Yeah. Is it easier to write for a small thing like that, or are dragons easier to do because they've got all that information in the block?
Well, there's always that tug of war between simplicity and interest. The more complex things, to a point, tend to be more interesting. There's more going on, there's more potential for synergy between different traits, different actions. And so you get more emergent complexity out of that. But then again, and this is a problem that WotC's designers clearly recognized because of how they changed how they handle spellcasting in Monsters of the Multiverse, giving a monster a big repertoire of spells it can cast using spell slots can get difficult to manage very fast. And anytime you're looking at a monster like that, you have to have a good plan worked out for yourself in advance, for how you are going to work your way down that list of spells, and which ones you should just not even bother to think about because they're situational and the situation is not coming up, or whatever. Those long lists tended to include a lot of things that were just sort of thrown in there to pad it out, and that didn't necessarily do anything great for the particular monster that could cast them, or they were something that might be cast out of combat, but it would be a waste of time to cast it during combat. Those things could just get really confusing and really unwieldy. I mean, even if you just look at the difference between the mage, which is sort of a manageable spell repertoire, and the archmage, which is out of control. Which isn't to say if you sit down with the archmage for a while outside your game session during your prep time and just put your nose to the grindstone and interrogate every single one of those spells, you will find a path. I did. But that is not the kind of thing you can pull off if you're looking at that stat block for the first time when the players encounter the archmage. You have to have a plan, or those things are just too much to handle. And I think that Wizards of the Coast clearly recognized a need to make those monsters playable with less prep.
Mm.
To make it more feasible to improvise with them if you haven't given it deep thought beforehand. I don't always agree with all the ways they did it, and it still leaves some questions surrounding when should you use a twice per day spell or a 3 times per day spell. What is the exact right moment to use a once per day spell? Because if you can only cast it once per day, you better use it at the right moment. You don't want to guess wrong. At the same time, at will spells. Okay, so an at will spell is kind of a basic tool in the toolkit, but there's that opportunity cost, right? Should you be casting this at will spell, or should you be doing something else with your action? Because it still costs you an action, even if it doesn't cost you a slot or anything like that. Still costs you an action. What else could you be doing with that action? Does that other thing make more sense? Or does this at will spell make more sense? Those considerations don't go away.
What's your opinion on having to re-roll for a dragon's breath attack? To me, a dragon breathes fire. Doesn't go, oh, I can't do it yet. I can't do it.
Oh, the recharge?
Yeah.
I don't mind that, because the thing is, the breath weapon is so powerful compared with the other things that the dragon can do, that you can't just let it do that every single round. For one thing, it'll get boring. When there's always one clear best choice, just doing that again and again and again and again, that's no fun for anybody. It's not fun for the players, it's not for the DM. And I kind of dig the recharge mechanic, because I like the fact that it doesn't allow you to predict when it's going to happen again. You cannot time the recharge. You can only guess that you can only know it's coming again soon. I don't know how soon, but maybe I want to get some licks in before it happens again. And then, it gives you more of that feeling of pushing your luck. It gives you some unpredictability. Unpredictability always adds interest. And so yeah, I'm actually kind of a fan of the recharge mechanic.
With the not legendary resistances, the ones that they have between player turns,
Legendary actions.
And it's normally like a claw attack and then maybe a tail and a bit of a wing flap. But it's that cost of this costs 2 and this costs 1. I find that a real struggle to think, what should I do? Should I, you know what I mean? Have you got any thoughts on using those and how to use them best?
Oh, yeah. Well, those things usually cost 2 or 3 actions because they do 2 or 3 things. Like, they are equivalent to taking 2 or 3 actions at once. They're combos. And they offer you a little bit more than just that, smack with the tail or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if going back to your dragons, the wing beat, that gives you 2 things. It gives you some area effect damage, and it gives you free movement without an opportunity attack. I mean, that's not shabby. It gives you, that one's actually kind of a bargain, because it gives you the additional benefit that you might knock some of those people down. But the fact that it has that radius, for example, 10-foot radius, that's a clue that you don't waste it on just one opponent.
Yeah.
That would be overkill if you have 2 or more opponents around you. Now you want to, use that wing beat to launch yourself up away from them and try to do a little bit of damage in the process. Get yourself airborne again. Because for one thing, it implies that as a dragon, you made the error of landing, which is,
Yes.
not really the wisest thing you could have done. Maybe they forced you to the ground somehow, or whatever. Maybe they, tricked you into chasing somebody somewhere. But and now you got to do the dust off. But so it's situational in a couple of different ways, where the other legendary actions might not be. So then you've got the ones that are situational and should be used when particular circumstances align, and then you've got the ones that are well, when you don't have anything else to do this.
Yeah.
And it and by happening off turn on, in between the turns of the players and the NPCs, you just get that feeling of like this enemy is nonstop. It's going to just keep throwing everything it's got at you until you prevail or run away or die.
Yeah, new players are normally like, hang on, how is it the dragons go again? It's like, oh no, I can go whenever I want. It's like,
Yeah.
what?
How is it that the dragons go again?
Yeah.
It's a dragon. That's how. Deal with it. This is what you're up against now. You just went to the big leagues, So yeah.
So what we got here? Did any monster surprise you in its strategy? When you're working it out, were you sort of like, oh, this is not the way I expected it to be? A bugbear is more cunning than I thought.
Oh, the Zorn.
Okay.
When I started looking at the Zorn and the things that its traits and its actions allowed it to do, I was floored. I was laughing as I was realizing some of the things that a Zorn can pull off, because it's just so crazy. It's so crazy. And I love it. It's crazy in the best way. And I had never really thought about until I sat down, because I hadn't run one in my own campaign yet. I actually still haven't. It's one I've never used, but I did analyze it for the book, and I sat down that first time. And okay, so it can just kind of melt its way through the earth. It can just sink in. It burrows without disturbing the earth. But it has these claws. It has these teeth. It has tremor sense. It can sink in. It can feel when you're going overhead. Then it can come out and attack. Why should it come out all the way? The earth itself is giving it cover. Why should it stick out anything except its mouth and eyes? Or its legs if it's gonna claw attack. Why doesn't it just pop up, claw, bite, and then sink back in? When you realize the possibility of stunts like that, it's like, oh boy, I can't wait to bring this out.
Yeah. So were there any challenges translating the more complex monsters? What gave you a headache? What kept you up at night?
Nothing kept me up at night, but long spell lists gave me a headache. I think what gives me a headache more now that I'm off of the core monster books and looking at some of the source books, I think that some things have become a little oversimplified, and I think some of them have become kind of video gamey. So a lot of spells like Scorching Ray and Magic Missile and Disintegrate and Eldritch Blast have been translated into ranged spell attacks that appear in the actions section of the stat block under the other attacks. And that's fine when you are taking one of these old spells and, for example, turning Chromatic Orb into Chromatic Bolt and making it a ranged spell attack and having it not cost a spell slot. It's just a thing. That doesn't bother me so much. What bothers me is when they're now starting to create new monsters and say, okay, it's got to have a melee attack and a ranged attack, and the ranged is just some kind of magic-y thing. I call those mage lasers, and I really don't care for them much, because they remind me of wizards in video games who just hang back and throw magic laser, magic laser, magic laser, magic laser, and that's all they do most of the time. And that is just not satisfying to me at all. And I think they have begun to lean on that too heavily, and that gives me a little bit of a headache. But the main thing, the other main thing is and Spelljammer bothered me a lot with this.
It sucked.
There are some good monsters in there. I mean, I really like, for example, what they did with the Thurkreen, but but there are a lot of monsters in there that are just there's no synergy between the different traits and actions. They just feel like a loose mess of parts. Nothing interacts with anything else. You don't get any tactical combinations. And there are no choices to be made. There are no decisions to be made. They're always just going to do this, and it just leaves you without options. It leaves you without really any ways to make the encounter more fun. And those are very disappointing to me. I hate to see those because I know there are some very, very smart people working on these things. That a lot of the time they do great work, and I see something like this, and I think, man, they must be just loading you up with way, way too much work if you turned this in. Because I know I know that all these people are capable of putting out better, and that if they were given the right conditions and support to do better, they would. And to me, it's just sad.
Let me run this by you. Just made me think of. I played a Thri-kreen in Spelljammer, and they had the 5th edition was telepathy only. It didn't speak. So I was like, oh, how am I going to role play this? Just had to basically hand wave it and say, I could do sign language, but and then so you've got basically, I'm thinking languages. Telepathy is a problem for me when only one person can hear it at a time.
Mhm.
And then the player's got to go, you say it as a DM if it's an NPC or whatever, and then the player goes, he said, and repeats it. That's just
Yeah.
not fun, is
It's
it?
like in Galaxy Quest, right? When the Sigourney Weaver's character, Tawny Madison, Lieutenant Tawny Madison, just repeats whatever the computer says.
But like I was doing a thing on a video the other day, and it had Grell languages, Grell. Well, that's not helpful to me. Do you know what I
Well,
mean?
it's helpful. It's helpful in the sense that that thing is just going to gabble at you.
Yeah.
And unless somebody out there actually bothered to learn Grell,
Can you imagine?
this thing is you can tell this thing is trying to talk to you, but you can't make any sense out of what it's saying unless you cast tongues or unless you cast comprehend
Yes.
languages, and
Of
then
course.
that unlocks it. But yeah, I don't mind things like that. I don't mind just like things that are incredibly niche. That like 19 times out of 20, this is just a brain with a beak babbling stuff at you that you can't make heads or tails out of. But that 20th
Yeah.
time, there's just something that makes it actually possible, not just to tell that this thing is trying to communicate, but that you can actually communicate with it.
Yeah. Do you now have a system then when you get a new stat block? Have you got a little thing saying what's its fears, what's its motivation? Do you know it systematically or?
I've got yeah, I mean, I've got pretty much a routine. I tend to go from top to bottom. I tend to look at the stat blocks before I look at the flavor text, because I want to see, what does the stat block say about this creature? What does it tell me about this creature? And then I ask myself, is the flavor text consistent with that? And if not, why not? What's the difference? Did I miss something? Or conversely, like, yeah, maybe this flavor text doesn't really make any sense, and I should just, um, let my own judgment override the flavor text. They do emphasize, it's easy to miss because everyone likes to go straight to the monster pages and the stat blocks, and everyone skips over the introductions and the little
Yeah.
small print and the
True.
things in the scraps of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe some people read those. I tend not to pay huge attention to them, but I have done it often enough to know that they say the information in these pages is not always reliable. It's provided by people who may or may not be right. That's their conceit, right? All of the information you have about these creatures and their lifestyles and their ecology and their behavior all come from potentially unreliable narrators,
Yeah.
and it's that conceit that gives DMs the freedom to say, in my game, I can change it to whatever I want. You heard this, you heard wrong. And So, so I don't have any compunction whatsoever with overriding the flavor text when I feel that it's justified. But I do have some established guidelines for myself. Like, what does it mean for a creature to have intelligence 7 or below? What does it mean to have 8 to 11? What does it mean to have 12 and up, 14 and up? What does it mean to have more than 18? Same thing for wisdom. I tend to use intelligence as a measure of ability to make snap decisions, assess situations, read the room, and wisdom as a gauge of do you make good choices? Um, Intelligence is, can you gather the data? Wisdom is, do you draw the right conclusions from the data and act on it appropriately? So things like, how strong a survival instinct do they have? Do they know when a fight is pointless and they should just stop fighting?
Mm.
Do they know when they shouldn't start that fight at all? Things like that.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense.
My ideas of the ability contour and the primary offensive and primary defensive ability determining combat roles. When you see that a monster has its highest offensive score is in strength and its highest defensive score is in constitution. Okay, this thing is a brute that will just charge in and go toe to toe with anybody, because that's what that contour means. What if strength and dex are high but constitution is low? Then it hits hard and moves fast and does not just sit there letting you pound on it. Things like that. It's become a kind of it's just become a kind of language that I've picked up on, that I read out of the stat blocks. I can't really explain it better than that. But things like, does it have proficiency in perception and stealth? Okay, well, that means it's an ambush attacker. It's an ambush hunter.
You make it so clear, and that's like obvious now. And yeah, it's taken you to spell it out. Thank you.
Well, and it took, reading through dozens and eventually hundreds of these for me to recognize the recurring patterns and see, okay, this is no longer just my hunch. This is no longer just my interpretation. This is the intention of the designers, because they are choosing to do it this way over and over. And so
Yeah.
now I feel like I'm understanding what they are saying to me.
Yeah. Zombies.
Hmm.
You made me think of zombies with their slam attack.
Hmm.
What happened to their thirst for brains? What happened to, normal zombies? They go down and they're down. Ash zombies they come back if they roll, get back up if they roll well enough. That's more interesting to me. And where zombies should have a bite of some sort. Although I do find it, a bite and claw, a bit of a tedious thing in a stat block. That's all they have. Discuss.
Well, for one thing, there's not just one kind of zombie. I mean, zombies have been evolving since they were invented, and I'm not talking in D&D, I'm talking in pop culture. Every generation, it seems like every half generation redefines zombies and what they can do. Eating brains, that's George Romero zombie, that's Walking Dead zombie, that's Shaun of the Dead zombie.
Yeah.
But some zombies are not even that threatening. They're just creepy. Some zombies move fast. Some zombies are easy to kill. Some zombies are difficult to kill. This is a zombie. It's a kind of zombie. The chief thing about the D&D zombie is that it's hard to make it go down and stay down. It's got that thing where if you reduce it to 0 hit points, it gets to make a con save, and if it succeeds, it stays up with 1 hit point. That is what makes the D&D zombie distinct in the way that Nimble Escape makes the goblin distinct. I find that if you're looking for what it is that makes a monster distinct, the place to look for that is in the traits in between the challenge rating and the actions. those traits in there give you the flavor of the monster. They give you the vibe. They give you the core concept, the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch of the zombie is that it doesn't stay down. The elevator pitch of the goblin is that it slips away easily and it hides easily. And
Yeah.
so anytime a stat block gives you those things, they're worth paying a lot of attention to, because that's the flavor right there. That's where you learn what that monster is all about. And then you look at the actions that it can take and you say, okay, so up here is what it is, down here is how it puts what it is into action, how it puts it into effect.
Yeah, vulnerabilities is another thing that
Mhm.
seems to have fallen through the cracks from older generations of this game. But I think, like zombies, for example, should be vulnerable to radiant damage.
Sure, why
You
not?
know, it's like it just makes sense. I don't know what happened to vulnerabilities over the years. You know that a skeleton takes bludgeoning damage terribly. Well, that makes sense, but you know,
I don't have an answer to this, but I have a hunch. And my hunch is that vulnerabilities often come from folklore. And the more
mm,
closely a monster is tied to folklore, the more likely it is to have a vulnerability. And the more if a monster is created from scratch, here we are inventing a new monster for this source book or this adventure campaign. There's not a body of folklore telling you it's weak to this. And convincing weaknesses are surprisingly hard to think of. I was having a very interesting conversation recently with the game designer Banana Chan, and we just got to talking about werewolves, and it was kind of a funny thing. She was bringing up werewolves as an example of something, then it turned out not to be a very good example, but we just
mm,
wanted to keep talking about werewolves. And the question is, why are they harmed by silver weapons?
mm,
And why are they vulnerable to this? And she had a hypothesis and I had a hypothesis. Banana's hypothesis was that werewolves are creatures of natural forces, that they are tied to the primal, and these weapons are things that must be made by human hands. And so that's what makes the werewolves vulnerable to them. I was thinking werewolves are closely tied to the moon, right? It's the phase of the
yeah,
moon that spurs the lycanthropic transformation. And in alchemy, which metal is associated with the moon? Silver.
okay,
So here we have two different but compatible narrative reasons, folkloric reasons why a werewolf might be vulnerable to a silver bullet or a silver dagger or a silver sword. But if you're creating a new monster from scratch, are you giving it that kind of thought? Often not.
mm,
So if you're gonna come up with a good vulnerability, there has to be just that little thing. Even if it's not immediately obvious, it should be obvious if you think about it, that just makes you go, "Oh yeah, of course."
yeah, like there's some intelligent writing behind it. You're like,
Mhm,
it's me who doesn't get it. Yeah, vampires not being able to travel over running water baffles
mhm.
me. What is that about? Do you
It's
know?
folkloric.
Is
It's
it?
folkloric. Yeah, that is a folkloric feature of vampires. Everything that is included in the vampire stat block is a folkloric feature of vampires. The thing is, the stat block doesn't include every folkloric power or weakness of vampires. They selected, a reasonable number and went with that. And this yeah, you know what? If
Mm,
you want the others, you can put them in yourself. But here's a
yeah,
representative sample of
yeah.
what people are likely to know about vampires.
And then I've got my players saying, "Well, I'll just pour a water skin on a slight incline then, and they won't be able to come over it." It's like that's it just causes me problems. So is it easier
I think a
to?
smart vampire would just wait till the glass was empty and then
Yeah,
come at
I've
you.
got I've got all of my life. Yeah, I've got eternity.
Or just use its charm on you from the other side.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking if I were to write what an angel's motivations were, and the monsters know what they're doing, right?
Mhm.
I would be thinking, okay, what does an angel, a celestial, actually want? And then you've got the good or bad. If it's attacking me,
Mhm.
isn't that against some sort of protocol?
Well, so there's a couple of things going on there. One is that I am an old hidebound fuddy-duddy grognard, and I still think that that alignment is very useful. I think that alignment can communicate certain things to the DM, to the players, about what a creature's priorities are, what its morality is, what kind of compunctions it might have. It can just tell you things about its style. Um, so a lawful good creature. Now here is a personal bias that I have. I associate I associate good alignment with being other focused and with wanting to preserve life. So a good creature does not kill unless it has to, and it puts others first before itself. Or it's sort of like the robots in Asimov. It will not harm someone or through inaction willingly let someone come to harm. And of course, law wants to have things nice and tight.
Mm.
So when you have a diva, for example, or a planetar,
Mm.
and I have written about this. Divas, planetars, solars do not try to kill creatures unless they are intrinsically evil.
Mm.
Not just evil, but intrinsically evil. They will kill fiends. They will kill undead. But a human who's doing bad things, they got to be really, really bad. They got to be evil to the core for an angel to try to kill them.
Mm.
Instead, it will just try to subdue and stop them. And they will always prioritize attacking the most chaotic and most evil characters first, in the hope that defeating them will get all their other opponents to see the error of their ways and stand down. And if that doesn't happen, then they go to the next most chaotic and evil ones and they work their way up. So if you've got like a lawful neutral or a neutral good or lawful good character that has somehow found itself in the company of these, absolute rotters, and is probably like, hey, I didn't agree to this. This is not what I came here for. The angel is going to spare them.
Mm.
It's going to show them mercy. And even once it gets past the chaotic evil and the chaotic neutral and the neutral evil and the lawful evil, like, now the angel is not trying to kill them anymore. Now it is just knock you unconscious, just stop you. If its stat block allowed it to just put kind of a hour-long hold person on you without even knocking you unconscious at all, it would do that. It's going to use the least force necessary to stop you from doing chaotic evil things.
Yeah.
And I treat other other celestial good aligned creatures that way too. They don't want to kill. They will kill intrinsically evil things. But if they have a choice, if they are attacking somebody who is, or being attacked by someone who is evil by choice, they might kill. But somebody who is thoughtlessly doing evil, or somebody who is not truly evil at all, they won't kill them.
Mm.
To the extent that in the case of a solar, they'll use their bow against fiends and undead, but against other creatures they will only use their sword, because you cannot make a non-lethal attack with a bow, and you can make a non-lethal attack with a sword.
Yes. Wise man, you're like a bearded Yoda even. So your other books then, Keith, the ones that came after, one was a book 2 of monsters and strategies.
More Monsters Know What They're Doing, which covers Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Now, it can be said in some sense to cover Monsters of the Multiverse, but the trouble was it was already in its third proof when Monsters of the Multiverse hit shelves, and I was not able to look at Monsters of the Multiverse before More Monsters was already going to press. But dear readers, dear fans, if you have Monsters of the Multiverse, you can still get value out of More Monsters because I have published addenda to all the monsters that changed significantly enough to affect their tactics on my blog, themonstersknow.com.
Awesome. And what about the isn't there a player strategy book you did?
Yeah, that one came in between. That one was Live to Tell the Tale, combat tactics for player characters, which I am hoping to revise and update very soon.
Cool.
Part of that, I've felt for a long time that one was in need of some revision. Particularly the last section, which I think could be a better teaching tool than it is. But of course, some of that content is going to depend on what's in the new player's handbook that drops later this year. So the final revision of that is going to have to come after that. And of course, the same is probably going to happen with The Monsters Know What They're Doing when the new monster manual comes out.
Yeah.
And then yes, so there's Live to Tell, there's More Monsters Know What They're Doing, and then there is How to Defend Your Lair, which takes real world principles of building security and area defense and applies them to the designing of monster and NPC lairs.
Well, the new Bastion rules that are coming in for strongholds, that could be used with that as well. So future projects, is there anything you can tell us to look out for?
Nothing definite at this time. I
All
am
in
working
there.
on something. Well, some of it's down here. I'm working on something which I hope to be able to announce relatively soon. It's still got a ways to go. I still need to find out whether my publisher's interested in it, but it's in the pipe. And of course, new editions of The Monsters Know and Live to Tell when I have the necessary information to create those.
Okay, I've got one final question, and that is: have you played Baldur's Gate 3?
I have completed 2 run-throughs of it. And I'm now taking a break and playing some Starfield in the meantime. But yes, I have played BG3 and I've done two playthroughs.
Thoughts on that? Because the strategies that you have probably seen in the stats aren't transposed into the game. It's more of a straight hack and slash.
No, actually BG3 has some awesomely designed encounters, and I think the encounter design of BG3 is something a lot of DMs and a lot of adventure writers could really learn from, because some of it is just ingenious. It's really wonderful. I will say one of the things I've noticed about BG3 is they almost never throw just one monster at you.
Yeah.
In fact, I cannot think of any major fight, any major combat encounter that includes just one enemy. It's almost always an enemy and minions, or a group of enemies. So there's a good lesson there. It makes lots of use of terrain, which is very cool.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I wish that some of the companion NPCs were not so off-putting right at the outset. But that is a problem that solves itself over time. So
excellent. I didn't know whether you were into the gaming aspect or not. Well, Keith, what an absolute pleasure to pick your brains for an hour. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.